This is the DRS train.
Welcome to the DRS Train podcast. This service is What If Max Verstappen Was Never in Formula One? I'm your driver, Peter Brook, and your conductors today are Nav F1 and returning guest DanNoSkill. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi, Peter. Very interesting hypothetical to look at today.
Yeah, good morning, Peter. Good morning, Nav. It's going to be a really interesting one to see what F1's going to be like.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a video that will make a certain fan base very happy. So yeah, as the title goes, we're going to try and pontificate on and speculate on how Formula One would have looked since 2015 if there was no Max Verstappen. Now, whether or not he becomes a racing driver and maybe goes into WEC or IndyCar, or he channels his years of torment and abuse from Jos into becoming a prize boxer, or he just doesn't exist at all. That's all kind of irrelevant. The idea is just to look at Formula One itself and pretend Max Verstappen was never in the equation. So I think, fortunately with him, because his junior career was quite short, it does simplify things a bit. When he first entered Formula One, so he came into the picture in 2014, and I did a video on this, my Red Bull driver transfers video explaining it. And it's actually kind of insane how quickly it all happened. Because it was August of 2014, he was in his first year single seaters, he joins the Red Bull junior team, and then a week later he gets signed for Toro Rosso, and he's only 16 at this point. So he was someone who he wasn't really in the picture for most of the time, and then just kind of comes out of nowhere and, by all accounts, basically usurps somebody like Jean-Eric Vergne, for example.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the drivers we can already start mentioning here is Antonio Felix da Costa, because he was a test driver. And did he join DTM in 2014 or 2015?
I think that was 2015, and he had some kind of connections to Ferrari, unless no, I'm thinking of Verne. Yeah, he did. He got a Red Bull backed seat in DTM in 2015. He's one of these drivers, again, going on a tangent already. He's one of these drivers who it seemed like he was kind of set up for Formula One and won loads of junior series and did really well and kept kind of hinting at it, and then it just never quite happened. And it was a similar thing, like Robin Freins was another one who had, all these test and reserved roles and drove in Abu Dhabi all the time and won Formula Renault 3.5, and then he ends up in Formula E. Even Callum Ilot's another one, again, a Red Bull Junior and Ferrari Junior, tests with Haas and Alfa Romeo and then ends up not doing Formula One. So yeah, Da Costa is someone you think maybe he's even a possibility if they were that determined not to give Vergne another try at Toro Rosso in 2015.
So I just checked. Da Costa was already in DTM in 2014. He just started, so he was already out of the picture. But the DTM seat was, of course, Red Bull backed, and I think he was sporting the Red Bull livery and all. So I'm just wondering, just at the very start, who gets those FP1 Toro Rosso sessions? Do they give it back to Buemi? Because it seems like it's obvious for us to just talk about the younger drivers who might get a seat. But Buemi was always in the picture. I mean, as soon as he got kicked out the Formula One team, he became he wasn't kicked, he was kicked out of a drive, but he became a test driver for like 4 or 5 years. So it wouldn't be that surprising to just see Buemi get the FP1 drives and be considered for 2015.
It was 11 years actually. He was a test driver. He stayed with Red Bull until the end of 2022. He did the young drivers test in 21, I think, when he was 32 years old or something. Yeah, he was around for a long time after losing his seat. But yeah, they just wanted him for testing experience. They never seemed to consider bringing him back in for a seat at any point.
So I'm going to ask the question now then of if they don't go for maybe I mean, it is the junior team, so we already know Red Bull like to put young drivers in there who've come through sort of the junior series, and they also have quite a fast rotation of drivers because they want you to just get in and start performing straight away. So I guess the option would really be they either keep Vergne on, because he didn't do that badly post 2013. It was just getting shown up a bit by Ricciardo, kind of, I believe threw him off a little bit, or threw off public opinion of him. But it's either keep him on or then maybe finding some of the junior drivers. So what do you guys think about like who else who's maybe a bit younger and maybe didn't get a shot at F1 or got a shot a bit later on could have been in Max Verstappen's place?
It's tricky because their options, considering it's Red Bull, their options were surprisingly limited at this point. Because in the previous decade, around the mid 2000s, they had a tendency, like any old sod could get a place on the Red Bull junior team. I mean, they had, I think in 2006 there were 16 juniors, but then by 2013, 2014, they'd whistled this down to almost one because the change came around 2007. They started bringing in Vern, Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel. Well, actually, he'd been there since 2001, and they were like, maybe quality over quantity is where we should go. But I'm looking now, their only official junior in 2014 was Alex Lynn, who won the GP3 series that year. But then he ended up leaving them, and in 2015 he joined Williams and became a junior for them, or a development driver or something of that nature. But before that, they'd had, Da Costa wasn't strictly speaking a junior anymore. He'd left in 2013, but they were still backing him. But they'd also had like Tom Blomqvist, Callan O'Keefe, even Bike Skavissa, who later on people know from doing the W series. So even, Vern is the obvious one, but then you think to yourself, okay, well, that would have been his fourth consecutive season with Toro Rosso. So maybe they're like, this is not the time. But then Alex Lynn is a definite possibility, particularly after winning GP3.
It's interesting because, as we know, Red Bull has always had all those academy drivers, but from what I've seen in 2014, there was just this little gap where, as you said, there wasn't this incredible load of talent, really. And it was just Alex Lynn, which, yeah, as you said, could have been considered. I still think that for the sake of this hypothetical, the best choice is to just keep Verne, because winning GP3 and going straight to Formula One when you weren't a Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton kind of generational talent, it's not particularly gonna get you promoted that quickly. So personally, I feel like Verne would just have stayed one more year. And yes, it wasn't common back then to stay that long at Toro Rosso, but there just really wasn't that much talent.
The only other driver I saw's name like pop up as I was sort of having a little look earlier on about who could potentially have got that seat was, he would be quite young at the time, but was Pierre Gasly. There was still some talk about him. He'd made his GP2 debut in 2014, and then I think, did he win it either 1 or 2 years later? So it's not unfeasible that Gasly could have also potentially have gotten that seat maybe a bit earlier if there wasn't a Max Verstappen in the way.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I was looking at the list of drivers that never got to Formula One, so I'd forgotten. I said only Alex Lynn. Of course, there was Gasly and Sainz, and a couple of others were still juniors as well that would have definitely been above him. Yeah, either way, Carlos Sainz still gets his seat, but Gasly, maybe he'd have been only 18 himself. So pretty young. I think they might have thought it's just a bit too risky with that one.
Yeah, because Gasly, he was rising very fast. I mean, I always say about Gasly, there used to be this show on Disney XD, you might remember. It still exists, the Disney Channel, and they used to have on the French version, they used to have these little talent discovery 5 minute discovery episodes on your next big athletes, and they showed an 11-year-old Pierre Gasly doing karting in like 2008. So I was 6 or 7, and I saw this kid with like long hair be like, "Yeah, I want to make it to Formula One," and I was like, "Yeah, sure, you're never gonna make it. I mean, you're one of those random karting kids who just doesn't make it." Because I was 7, but I knew that it's really hard to get into Formula One. And then 8 years later, he is there. So for sure, he was always extremely highly rated. And in 2013, he wins the Euro Cup Formula Renault 2.0, and then straight into Formula Renault 3.5. He finishes second in 2014, just behind Carlos Sainz. So Toro Rosso could have wanted in 2015 to just stack them up together against each other, Sainz and Gasly. So yeah, well, what are we saying? Do we go, if we are Helmut Marko at this point, or Franz Tost, do we go for Gasly or Verne?
it is a tricky one. I mean, I know, and you get this from the Beyond the Grid podcast he did with Vern. There was tension at his time in Toro Rosso. I think because he was, I think he wanted more of it, and they were like praising him when he'd finished 8th or 9th, and he's like, "That's not good enough for me." And it's like, but for that team, it is. But his performances were still pretty good. I mean, he beat Ricciardo in 2012. I think Ricciardo then beat him in 2013, and then Ricciardo gets the promotion after Vettel leaves to Red Bull. 2014, and again he did beat Kvyat in 2014, but then Kvyat was a rookie. Even so, it is similar to the modern situation of Tsunoda. It's like, where is there to go? And at this point, they were still definitely in the philosophy that Toro Rosso is a temporary thing. It's a stepping stone. You're not supposed to spend too long there, and maybe a 4th consecutive season is just too long.
Yeah, I think no matter what, then at this point, it's either Vern gets like an extra season at most, and unfortunately, I don't really see him getting the Red Bull drive in this hypothetical. So I think it's no matter what, either Gasly gets the seat in 2015 instead of Max, or he gets the seat like 1 or 2, like in 2016, a year later after he's had a bit more experience. I think it's kind of inevitable he gets in to F1 earlier than he does like in our actual timeline.
I think that's a good one. I think you can consider that whatever happens in 15, Gasly is the Verstappen replacement in 2016. So I think that can lead us to looking at 2016 then. And this is where it gets really tricky, I think. Because obviously, this is the year when Max would replace Kvyat at Red Bull. But does that even happen? What do we do with this? Because this completely changes the timeline. This is when it gets it becomes a big mess. Does Kvyat get dropped? Does Sainz get promoted? I don't think Gasly or I mean, Gasly, we're going with Gasly, so I don't think Gasly gets promoted. So do Sainz and Kvyat swap seats?
On the basis that Kvyat beat Ricciardo in 2015, I think he still keeps his seat at Red Bull. I'm more interested, because Sainz is a known quantity, how Gasly would have done in 2015 at Toro Rosso, and I feel like not brilliantly. Maybe just kind of. I think Sainz would have beaten him. They were similar levels of experience, and they'd both come up from Formula Renault 3.5. But I feel like it just wouldn't have worked out that well if you consider this is a whole almost 3 years earlier than he did enter Formula One.
Yeah, definitely, because Gasly is one of the drivers who had to wait the longest to get to drive. I think people forget that with the modern drivers, especially in the early 2020s, when there was an issue in terms of just available seats, Gasly had to wait so much. I mean, he had to go into a super formula for a year. So I'm not sure if that means Red Bull didn't think he had the adequate experience or lack thereof, or if it was himself who just wasn't that fast. So I feel like maybe Sainz would have been more prepared for sure, if that was even a question.
I think I'm going to lean on the side of, I think what Peter said at the start of his point, which was that Kvyat would probably keep the seat, because a lot of the pressure was coming from the fact that you had Max Verstappen, who's like this generational talent. Everyone's been saying it for his whole junior career, and there's Mercedes after him, potentially even Ferrari, I believe, tried to sign him, and I think Jos was pushing for him to go to Ferrari. But now that's taken out of the picture, Red Bull can probably take their time a bit more. There's no need to put Max Verstappen in a top team so they can secure him. And I imagine, even though Sainz and Gasly were good drivers with a bit of hype around them in their own right, it was nowhere near Max Verstappen levels. So they could probably take their time, and then, even if the torpedo incident happens with Sebastian Vettel, I reckon that you would still see Kvyat in that Red Bull seat for the full 2016 season instead.
Yeah, it just means that there's Max kind of he kind of came in like a wrecking ball, in some cases literally, and it really did stir things up in terms of what we should expect from juniors and how young you should be. Because I guess another thing, if there's no max, there's no need to bring in this rule that you must be 18 or older before you can get a super license. And it would particularly with someone like Gasly, you wouldn't see this obvious ascension in the same to Red Bull, because I'm not expecting him to beat Carlos if they're together as teammates. But then if they did decide to not keep him and then drop him at the end of 2015, that again limits their options a bit, because the junior team wasn't so full at the time. Because they'd had in 2015 both Callum Ilott and Dean Stoneman joined the junior team. Ilott only did for a year and then he became a Ferrari junior. I think Dean Stoneman was the one who had cancer, which had suspended his career for a long time. So the junior side is limited in options, and on that basis, maybe they do just decide to keep Gasly for a second go.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I suppose. I mean, Nav, what do you think in terms of are they pushing to get Kvyat or Ricciardo out of that main Red Bull team, or do you think now they're going to take their time a bit more without Max coming in and shaking things up so much?
Again, it's so hard to think about how Kvyat would have performed in the second half of 2016. And seeing what happened and how quick they were to act on it, and how Sainz was also a driver who kind of got thrown about. Even when he went to Renault, it was mid-season to replace Palmer and stuff. So I feel like maybe towards the end of 2016, if Kvyat really didn't improve at all from what we saw, Sainz could have gotten a drive. But at least going into 2017, I'm pretty confident in saying that Sainz would have gone to Red Bull if he had performed the same. Because when did he go to Renault? Was it in 2017? Yeah.
End of 2017, Singapore? No, I think it was from Kota onwards.
Yes. Yeah, it was for the last 4 or 5 races.
Yeah.
But yes, so going into 2017 then, just simple question, does Sainz replace Kvyat?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it depends on maybe what happens after the whole incident with Vettel, whether there's still influence there from him that ends up with Kvyat's career sort of get. Because I believe in 2016 Kvyat wasn't performing necessarily badly in the first half. I think he was on the podium a couple times. He'd obviously got caught up in those incidents, which even to this day it's debated if it was actually him at fault or if he was just going for a bit of a risky move and it didn't go his way. So another thing I would have sort of asked is, before we even consider who gets the seat for 2017, is what happens at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016 without Max Verstappen? Because number one, you got to think who's actually in the seat at that point, and then who would win the race? Would Ricciardo win it? Would Kimi Räikkönen win it?
Yeah, I think we need to we can't go too deep into butterfly effect and assume that Max not being there means that Mercedes don't crash. Let's assume that they still crash into each other. Because this one is, again, my first iceberg, another plug, covered this about people thinking that race was effectively rigged for Max because he was put on a far better strategy than Ricciardo was to give him the win. But if it's a Sainz, if it's a Kvyat, I don't know. I think I'd go for Kvyat. He seemed to have more sort of gusto at that time. I think he'd have, I think he could have won it. It would have been a sort of Maldonado-esque type event.
Yeah, I think it depends on if you think, because it was the same strategy mistake, wasn't it? Not mistake, but same 2 strategies that Ferrari and Red Bull went with. They put Vettel and Ricciardo on the same one and Raikkonen and Verstappen on the same one. And it ended up being like the second drivers had the better strategies, which is why they won, or was why they were fighting for the lead. Mm-hmm. So it's whether, I guess, Kvyat could have held off Raikkonen, which is just like up to whoever you think's a better driver in that period of time. But yeah, I guess if we're going with Kvyat staying, then he could have won that race, and I think that would have vastly improved his chances for then staying on for 2017.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. If he does win that, then Sainz probably spends another year. And so do we think Sainz and Gasly then stay there for 2017? Because as Peter said, no one was really knocking on the door at that point. As we know, in 2018, they went with Brendan Hartley. So that is a big proof that no one was knocking on the door. And yeah, in 2017, they probably just keep Ricciardo Kvyat again in a car that still wasn't performing that well at all.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the new entries for the junior team in 2017, it was Neil Verhagen, some American guy, and Dan Ticktum. I think we can assume Ticktum wasn't destined for Formula One, but yeah, no other new people actually, because it was well mid-season, I guess. Brendan Hartley returned because he was a junior around from about 2008 till like 2011, and then got dropped and came back. And even Albon, he did 1 year as a junior, finished right at the bottom of whatever series it was, and then got dropped and came back. So maybe they do just stick it out with Gasly again. I mean, you can assume 2016 second year, he probably does improve, and it's probably kind of there or thereabouts with Sainz. So on that basis, yeah, maybe he does get a third year in 2017.
So at this point, we're kind of encountering the problem that Red Bull have even now that we're talking about, which is where they, I mean, in Sainz and Gasly, I think it's pretty much agreed upon. You've got two really strong drivers there in the junior team, similar to maybe what you could call Tsunoda and Lawson, like now. And then you've got the main Red Bull team locked out again with Ricciardo and Kvyat, which would be, again, by the looks of it, a solid driver pairing. I guess the other question is then, you know that Ricciardo begins to get disgruntled if he's not the lead driver. So who does Red Bull go for the main driver between Ricciardo and Kvyat if there's no Verstappen in the mix?
I mean, I guess it would. I mean, it would. In the grand scheme of things, it was fairly even between Ricciardo and Max. I think the thing that helped equalize it was the enormous number of engine failures and breakdowns that they took turns having. I mean, in 2017, it was almost entirely Max, and then 2018, it was almost entirely Ricciardo. But yeah, there would be a bit of a bind that they could, I guess, get away with them being close together because they're not quite. 2017, they're better, but they're still not fast enough to really be challenging for the title yet. But then at this point, but by the end of 2017, I think Sainz, and maybe less so Gasly, but Sainz especially, would be thinking, okay, when am I getting this gig with Red Bull? This is my third year with Toro Rosso. They've got to think about moving me up now, particularly if we're to assume that Kvyat is being basically fast but destructive at the same time.
So then Sainz could have still moved to Renault. And I actually don't think that the Verstappen presence in Formula One really changes Sainz's path, because I think he would have left anyway, because he always knew his strength, and with all his strength and with all his allies in Formula One, his cousin and his dad and all, they have always been very proactive in terms of looking for teams and looking for opportunities. So I feel like Sainz would have still left, unless Kvyat gets dropped quite obviously, which again, it's such a hard hypothetical into 2017, but unless Kvyat gets dropped, Sainz would have left anyway. So it does make it easier for us to just assume that Kvyat stays, because if he doesn't, then that's a whole new kind of worms to open. Because then in 2018, we need to consider who will then join Toro Rosso.
So I think then, I think I agree there with Nav that Sainz's path wasn't affected by Max as much as he needed to get himself out of Toro Rosso and into a team that could maybe compete closer to the front, so the move to Renault. So if we assume Sainz does that at the same point in time and they keep Kvyat for another full season, then it's either you start to think, well, okay, is Ricciardo clear of Kvyat, or maybe the other way around? Are they close, but one of them's going to get dropped? Maybe if we consider, like Peter said, that Kvyat still is quite crash happy. And then who's going to get the Toro Rosso seat when Sainz leaves? Those are sort of three big what ifs now.
Yeah, it's getting confusing already because if we think that 2018 there's no Kvyat at Red Bull anymore, then you start thinking, okay, does that mean he's demoted back to Toro Rosso, which I think even he wouldn't have accepted at that point, or is he just gone completely?
Given that in 2020 he was happy to come back, even though he was experienced, there is an argument for him to accept. But if we're going with the narrative that he has since won a race or maybe a race or two at Red Bull and has spent 3 years there, then that changes maybe because he maybe thinks he's better than that. And as we know, Ferrari has always rated him, and obviously they took him on as development driver eventually. So maybe Ferrari nabs Kvyat and puts him in a Sauber or in a Haas. So personally, I would go with, and to make it more interesting and to look at more drivers, I'd say Kvyat just leaves. And so in 2018, there's a new guy.
Yeah, that's a whole new can of worms if we trying to decide if he ends up joining Ferrari in some capacity. Because if he did that in 2018, I thought you were going to say that they dropped Kimi and put Kvyat with his best friend Sebastian at Ferrari. If he goes to Haas, well, either probably Grosjean in Sauber. That's an interesting one because that means I guess they just get rid of Ericsson, because I don't know if they would not put Leclerc in place of Kvyat.
Yeah.
So yeah, there could just be something as simple as that. Just drop Ericsson and put him in a Sauber.
I would say, wouldn't it be a big step down though for Kvyat to go from a front running team, arguably like second or third fastest in 2017, probably third fastest, to like a Sauber or a Haas though, in hopes of maybe getting a Ferrari seat? I feel like he would only leave if he could go to Ferrari or Mercedes at that point. If he's performing well, like we said, like maybe got a race win here or there. If he's not performing, then it's understandable he would get demoted.
Yeah, I don't know if he would join. If he's thinking I'll join Sauber to get to Ferrari, he wouldn't do that knowing Leclerc was there as well.
Yeah.
It would. Yeah. So I think maybe he does maybe he just becomes a test driver for somebody, or he just doesn't race. But yeah, if we think by 2018 he's gone, so then we have Ricciardo still Red Bull. If we're thinking Sainz is still going to Renault,
yeah,
I guess Gasly gets it a year early, which is reasonable at that point. And then that creates, but then that leaves us with 2 vacancies at Toro Rosso as well.
That's quite funny because we went from Gasly, who had always been in the waiting seat, and finally getting a drive in 2018, to in this timeline, oh, he's at Red Bull in 2018 and he probably gets a win or two because that car is actually quite good.
And he's not getting, psychologically destroyed by Max as well.
Yeah.
I feel like him and Ricciardo would get on like a house on fire. It would probably be quite a good pairing together. And there would be tensions, obviously, because the car is like, it's almost fast enough to make a run for the title. Although you would still get lots of engine failures probably on Ricciardo's side. So I think that he would start getting like a bit pissed off, because at this point, this would be his 5th season with Red Bull now, when Vettel at the end of his 5th season with them had won 4 championships. So I think he might be getting impatient nonetheless, but probably think, well, this is still the right place to be. But I'm now trying to think about what happens with Toro Rosso at that point. Brendan Hartley, yes, that's probably going to happen. But the second one, I need to look at who was kicking about in the junior team that could have been an option.
So I feel like 2018, a name that comes back this time. I know you dismissed it earlier, but Dan Ticktum comes back into play because at that point he is probably their best junior. Otherwise, it's Richard Vershaw, which, let's not go into that. But Dan Ticktum, at that point, what had he done? He had finished. No, never mind. He finished
Yeah.
7th in Formula Renault Euro Cup, and then he really made a name for himself in 2018, finishing second in F3 European. So, I mean, he did win the Macau GP in 2017, but that's not enough to get a drive.
It's still too early for him.
He'd probably get an FP1. He'd probably become an FP1 test driver.
Yeah.
The other big name that was a rumor back then was Pascal Wehrlein, because he was getting kicked out of Sauber for Leclerc to come in, because obviously Ericsson cannot get kicked out of Sauber because he's been funding them for 4 years at that point and ending every talent's career. So it used to be a debate between Hartley and Wehrlein, because obviously Wehrlein had the F1 experience, but Hartley was the only Red Bull junior who was capable at that point. And there was a big, I remember reading quite a few articles at that point as a Wehrlein fan, because there was a bit of a disagreement within Red Bull. Do we completely, for one of the first times in their history, not take a Red Bull driver and go for the more reliable choice, or do we stick with our guns here? And we know what they did. They stuck with Brandon. So that's another interesting one, because in the domino effect of everything that happens, I think Velan is still without a seat.
There's also, and again, I think this might be similar with the Ticktum issue, though. There is also the potential of Albon coming in a year early, but I believe that it was really like 2018 he needed to prove himself in a junior series more to then get that seat. So I think, again, it's like the Ticktum one where it's like, does he actually have the results to back an F1 drive at this point? Probably not.
So end of 2017, that was his first year in Formula 2, and he finished 10th. So kind of average. I mean, I think he didn't join. He never technically joined the junior team again. I don't think it was just it was a very last minute thing, him getting that Toro Rosso seat in 2019, because he was signed with a Formula E team and then cancelled that because he gets to go to Formula One. I think that for him that would have been a bit early, and I think they still would have had the hangover of that abysmal year he had in 2013 or whenever it was. Wehrlein is a possibility, although he was still a Mercedes, not a Mercedes junior, but linked with them and Toto at this point. But he may have accepted it on the basis that would have only been his third season at this point. And he's been, screwed over by Mercedes with Bottas getting the seat instead of him and then getting kicked out of Sauber. So I think maybe it is a possibility on the basis that, again, none of their juniors were ready, unless anyone that they dropped maybe the year before gets to stay a bit longer. But it was only names like Richard Verschoor, who's become just the unflushable turd of Formula 2, and Nico Carey, who doesn't even race anymore. Sergio Sete Camara, he was 2016, but he'd gone before then. Yeah, too early for Dan Ticktum. So yeah, maybe Wehrlein's a bit of a curveball for it.
The only other thing I could think of is if Kvyat wasn't performing well, they do what they did, but a bit later on, and demote him back to Toro Rosso, but later in his career. So giving him an extra, extra year and a bit, year and a half in the Red Bull team. And then if he doesn't perform, still gets into crashes, like we've sort of said, would probably happen. There's also the potential of, instead of going Haas or Sauber, he gets demoted back down to the Toro Rosso team.
Another possibility, just thinking, is that Toro Rosso could become team scalps by Ericsson, and they put in Wehrlein and Nasser and give him something. Maybe a bit less plausible. I mean, I think by this point he was deep into IMSA, and this would have been, he'd have had a whole year out of not doing 2017. Yeah, it can be tricky. I think they would have been in a bit of a bind of just having fewer, because you can start thinking about, maybe there are other drivers that would have joined the Red Bull Junior team, but that's way too complicated to try and think about people that were never members and then do join it at some.
A really tricky one, isn't it? But it is like that period of time where there's maybe not the most juniors to pick from, so it could end up being that we sort of see like an alternate timeline. So I'm curious then, who do you think we go for that lineup then for 2018? Who's got sort of the best CV? We've already said, was it Hartley's taking one seat, so it's that second seat. Who's actually going to be in it for, the next couple of years or the next season?
Let's do the curveball and say Wehrlein, a bit of a Nick de Vries kind of thing, and that becomes a fairly good lineup in the end. I mean, Wehrlein would destroy Hartley even without all of Hartley's bad luck, but still not a bad lineup. And again, Red Bull, again not a bad, worse than what they had in real life, but still a fairly competent lineup in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very happy with that. Again, I'm biased here, but there really wasn't that much Red Bull talent just during that period. And well, even when you try to think about Red Bull drivers who were in other categories at that point, there just isn't much going on. Do they go back with Da Costa? Do they? Again, Buemi does if they're that desperate, do you think Buemi is back into the picture if we really want to go down that route?
I feel like Buemi would have been like, "No, I'm not going to bother," because he was doing well in WEC. It's like, I'm not just going to go back to Toro Rosso and like pick up where I left off 7 years ago.
Probably a bit past Buemi now to like be racing, at least for a junior team especially. But if we go with that lineup then of Verline, Hartley, Gasly, and Ricciardo in the main team, I guess the next question is like, how does 2018 shape up? Because you had a couple wins from Ricciardo and Verstappen in real life, so how does that? Well, in our real timeline. So I guess we don't go too much into the butterfly effect and say Ricciardo still wins the races he won. What happens with Gasly? Is he on a similar level, or does he struggle again like we saw when he first went to Red Bull?
Maybe this is my Vettel bias showing, but I'm thinking without Max there, maybe it gives Vettel a slightly better chance of taking the championship. Because 2017 and 2018 particularly, when Max was still being a terrorist and hadn't really sort of reined himself in a bit, he did have a tendency to just get in the way and fuck things up for like Vettel and Hamilton, mostly for Vettel. And without that, you could easily say, oh, well, the China, that doesn't happen, the contact and the spin, even what's the other one? The contact, the Baku, the two of them taking each other out, and then that triggers the restart with the puncture, and Vettel having his locking his tires. Japan, Vettel hits him, Verstappen again. It's things like that. It's like, would that have still happened? Maybe that starts to swing things in Vettel's favor a little bit, but probably not. Probably still not enough for him to take the title. Having said that, was it 2017? Okay, that's going back a year. It was Mexico when Vettel and Hamilton both got punctures from Max or from each other or something like that at the start of that race when they were both fighting. There's all of those you have to think about. Is Gasly likely to sort of interfere enough or just kind of be a bit more well behaved?
Just going back into some options for 2018, I also saw that Nobuharu Matsushita was linked, and that might be more powerful than we think because Honda wanted the driver for a while, and he wasn't a bad Japanese driver. And I think he won a race in 2018 or 17, and maybe that changes everything. I still think we should go with our initial thoughts, but just throwing it out there that maybe the Japanese pressure, especially as was it 2018 where the transition happened to Honda engines?
17, I think, wasn't it? Because that was
17.
because they had Renault still.
Yeah.
The Renault, the Tag Heuer branded Renault engines in 16. 17 they go to, well, they still had Tag, because 17 was the year when the engines were blowing up non-stop.
Yeah.
18 was still Renault as well, and it was 19 after Ricciardo leaves, they get Honda.
Oh yeah, okay. But yeah, Matsushita.
So yeah, That was because Matsushita was linked to both Sauber and Toro Rosso at that point because, yeah, being a decent Japanese driver, as Peter has often said in all the episodes where we've covered Japanese drivers before, just being a decent Japanese driver can get you into a lot of Formula One teams. But yeah, I think he lacked the edge at that point. So I think Hartley Wehrlein is the option to go with in a very cranky.
And I think it works. I mean, Matsushita, because 2017, that was his first year in Formula 2, and he won 2 races and finished 6th. So, that it could be worse. But that year he was a development driver for Sauber. The year before, he'd been a development driver for McLaren. I don't think that means much other than he probably did the young drivers test with each of them. But yeah, again, not. I don't think there would have been, because he was never a junior, there probably wouldn't have been much of an incentive that he's destroying everyone, so we have to get him in. Yeah.
Last small thing about 2018. Lando Norris, I remember there was a small rumor of him replacing Brendan Hartley in 2018 mid-season when Hartley really wasn't performing. I am not going to entertain that thought because it all becomes way too much of a mess for this episode if Norris doesn't join McLaren and then joins the Red Bull system.
I think also probably because 2018, a lot of new juniors joined. So suddenly going forwards, they would have plenty of options because we had 2018, Nire Fukuzumi, Harry Thompson only karting, but Jack Doohan, Johnny Edgar, Yuri Vips, and Dennis Hauger all joined in 2018, and those could be contenders in the future. So it seems like going forwards, they'd have options. So if we think in all of this that Ricciardo decides not to leave, then going into 2019, that means we still have Ricciardo at Red Bull, probably still Gasly more than likely. Hartley, I don't think he's staying in 2019.
No.
Wehrlein's going to stay. I think Wehrlein would have done enough, definitely. So then maybe it is just Albon that they give him that gig, or I don't know if any of the new juniors from the previous year would have been. No, they're all too. They're all like Formula 4 level.
Again. Just throwing Ticktum in there again because he used to come up so many times during that era. I think 18, 19, 20, you always had the biggest Ticktum fans because he did this incredible feat of winning the Macau GP twice in a row, 17 and 18, and that is a huge statement. So maybe 17, 18, so he wins Macau GP twice, and finishing second in the championship for Formula Renault 3.5 puts him
European Formula 3.
Oh yeah.
That was the year that Mick Schumacher won it.
Yeah, and Ticktum made a mess. Well, Ticktum maybe killed his career because of Mick winning it, because of everything he said about. Well, Ticktum basically told us everything about what really happens in those feeder series.
Well, yeah, this is probably why he's become such an outcast in motorsport circles, is because he says it how it is and he's revealed a lot of truths that weren't supposed to be revealed. Because I do remember that in 2018, the second half that I didn't know about Mick before this, and then he starts winning races and we get all the memes of there isn't and all of that, and it's like suddenly everything falls into place, and then 2019 he has those obscenely good race starts in like every race in GP2, and then we get the whole illegal engine palaver. Ticktum, again, this is another aside. I was talking about people earlier who've been hinting at Formula 1 for years. He's one of these drivers, it feels like they've been around for like forever. Like him, again, Richard Verschoor has been around forever. Marcus Armstrong, they're people, their junior careers just never end, and they're just always around in some fashion. Maybe it's a social media thing, you see more of them when they're younger, or maybe I'm just thinking because Max did it in 1 year, why does it take everyone else so long to get, well, in this case, to not get to Formula 1? But 19, maybe it is just Albon. If we think Lando's still doing McLaren, George is still set for I don't think there were any other any Red Bull juniors in Formula 2 in 2018, because like I said, the new ones were all like Formula 4 level, so not ready enough, although people like Yuri Vips are going to start coming into the picture fairly soon.
I think I would agree with you, Peter, that I think again, like Verstappen being out, it's not gonna it causes obviously loads of implications, but when it comes to something like Albon getting the seat, I feel like that's something still reasonably that could happen with or without Max's influence on the team. And like again, like you said, there's just not tons of options, apart from like Nav mentioned Ticktum, but it's sort of like you go, well, those two in our timeline were probably reasonably pitted against each other for that seat, and Albon's the one that's gone and got it. So I don't see how that would change that much just without Verstappen being there. So I imagine just the safest bet, the one that makes the most sense, is to go with what happened at the actual time, which was Albon.
There's one rumor from 2019, which was Magnussen had apparently been offered a seat for Toro Rosso, and he declined it to stay with Haas. That's also quite random, but it was a thing that happened. I don't think that changes much unless he... Yeah, I don't think that Red Bull would have even offered a contract to Magnussen if they had Wehrlein and Albon.
It's unlikely he would have accepted it, even with the Rich Energy scandal. I think to be, it would have been a move sideways. I think to have already been there for 5 years at that point in Formula.
Yeah.
But 2019, no, this is definitely a transitional year, both real life and in this timeline, because I think at this point, well, now this is the third year of Gasly and Ricciardo as teammates. They've got a car which is better, even though, well, Mercedes have improved even more. Ferrari have gotten worse, and now they're in effectively the second fastest car until the whole illegal engine thing with Ferrari. And they start thinking we're kind of prepping ourselves for a title fight. But at the same time, I think Wehrlein would be definitely thinking, I should be getting a move up to Red Bull at this point. If we are to assume he's been comfortably beating Hartley and then Albon, but also the psychological aspect of Gasly, that is it the same thing of him just faltering against Ricciardo in the way he did against Max? And do they try a mid-season swap anywhere? Yeah, especially
as Wehrlein, he has... Maybe his biggest flaw in Formula One was that he was too outspoken. He had a very strong, fiery personality. For some reason, this has really made it into the news. And anytime you ask, not a casual fan, like a knowledgeable fan, what happened to Wehrlein, they'll be like, oh yeah, he was too... he had too much of a temperament and he would create issues at Manor. But I'm always there, like, I'm sure there are many other drivers who do that. Why is only Wehrlein getting blamed for being maybe a bit stricter? I mean, he came from DTM, where if you don't fight for yourself, they will literally push you around. This is a championship where pushing and shoving is legal. If there are some weird rules, you're allowed to do it into a corner, but not too deep into a corner, and you can push a car as long as you don't push all four wheels outside of the circuit. So I feel like definitely by that point, if we're assuming Wehrlein had been good, he would start pressuring Gasly for a seat. This is a driver who in 2017, when he was pitted against Bottas and Alonso for the Mercedes seat, was like, oh yeah, they should take me. I'm German, I'm good, I'm fast. And he said that in a speech at the 2016 Autosport Awards in front of basically the entire paddock. So yeah, this now becomes a conversation, I guess.
And another thing to factor in is Ricciardo, because now this is year 6 of Red Bull. It's been 5 years since he scalped Vettel. Still hasn't won the championship, and he's getting maybe at the most 3 wins a year. Is he getting impatient by the end of 19 and thinking, I'm going to look somewhere else? He might even think, seeing the way Vettel is faltering at Ferrari, that could have been an option. Bottas was still set. I mean, Bottas was still set to stay with Mercedes, and George would have been taking over from him eventually. But
McLaren was the biggest open seat at that point, because Everyone was rumored to go to McLaren at that stage. Obviously, Sainz got the drive, but yeah, Bottas, Ocon, even Kimi were rumored. I think Ricciardo was quite high on McLaren's list, and he only didn't. I think he didn't take the option, so I feel like that could be a valid
I was thinking
scenario.
more at the end of 2019 rather than the end of 2018. That going into 2020, if he would have been thinking about leaving Red Bull.
Yeah, sorry, I mean
Yeah.
2019 as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't change the championship outcomes. It's still the Lewis Hamilton show from this point onwards. But
if it's 2019, then it's less likely actually, because McLaren would have probably stuck with Sainz and Norris because we know how well they got along and it was a perfect dynamic. So yeah, the ship might have sailed at that point. And well, does he go to Ferrari? Is it that simple? Because Kimi leaves. So
and then
he just goes-
Gasly as well is that he's been there now for 3 years, I guess, and just a safe pair of hands that. But I think at this point there still would have been tension between him and Ricciardo, thinking that when the car gets better, we're going to be competing against each other for the championship, and while also thinking that you've got people like Wehrlein and Albon in the works behind us that could usurp. This whole scenario is surprisingly complex, actually, even just displacing one driver from the equation, because their junior team is enormous.
There's a lot of what ifs, and I think the main what ifs that we have to go through in terms of are we going to see a change in the main Red Bull driver lineup is number one, which we've sort of been saying the whole time, is what actually is the gap like between Gasly and Ricciardo? We're assuming that because it's not Verstappen, Gasly is able to cope with the pressure, and the two are reasonably close, maybe with the balance tilted in Ricciardo's favour, which, if it is tilted in Ricciardo's favour, the main push behind him leaving was that he wasn't going to be the number one driver. If he goes to, but the only other team I could realistically see him going to that isn't going to be a massive step down, because at this point in time, we're very much still in the era as well of the big three teams, where they're absolutely hundreds of points clear from like the other teams behind them, even McLaren. So anything else would be a step down, which we've seen he's willing to take if he's not number one. But if he is number one, the only other team we can realistically talk about is Ferrari. And if he goes there to replace Kimi, he's going to play number two to Vettel, although he has beaten Vettel in the same machinery before. So it does come down to how close Gasly and Ricciardo are, and then whether Ricciardo actually feels disgruntled enough that, to actually leave, or if he's been given that number one treatment he wanted, then he's probably going to stay, because that was the main push behind him going to sort of Renault and then McLaren.
I hate to complicate things even further, but one thing, of course, I've remembered in all of this is that if Ricciardo's at Red Bull into 2019, that means that Ricciardo is not at Renault in 2019. So it's still Hülkenberg, and with Sainz going to McLaren, that leaves a vacancy at Renault.
Alonso goes back and never retires.
Yes, yeah, he just just stays there.
Where's Esteban Ocon at this time?
Oh,
Would he be in
still
Renault?
maybe he. Should we make it easy and say he moves up there a year early, because 2019 he was just being a sort of not reserve for Mercedes, wasn't he? So maybe that's just the easy option, because otherwise it's because then you have to start thinking about the bloody Renault junior team or Alpine Academy or whatever it is now, and trying to work that one out. And yeah, if Alonso does retire, or if he okay.
Alonso moves to Red Bull.
Yes. Oh, I'm wondering if we can spin this in a way that he does get the seat in some fashion, or maybe he gets a Toro Rosso seat, and because he's a what at this point he's a 38-year-old rookie, may as well start at the bottom with Minardi again. Of course, go back to his roots.
Yeah, no, because what we are saying right now is that there is a little gap in terms of lead drivers, especially if Ricciardo leaves. So it wouldn't be completely impossible for Red Bull to be like, look, we've dabbled enough with good but not great drivers. Let's just get this old guy who's obviously not having a good time at McLaren. I don't know if that's a question we want to look at, but I feel like it definitely would have. If I'm thinking we are in 2018 or 2019, and Ricciardo leaves, and they're meant to have Gasly as a number one driver, which just doesn't really sit well. They would have definitely looked at this guy who's been depressed and shouting at everyone at McLaren.
This is because there's that famous picture of him in Red Bull overall. So he did test with them, didn't he? I think around 2018, 2019.
That's an edit. He never does.
Is it an edit?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a really good edit.
Yeah.
I actually think there's a case to be made here. I hadn't even thought of Alonso, but yeah, of course he's like would have retired. But if we look at either, like you said, either Ricciardo does just go, right, I'm going to Renault, I'm sick and tired of Red Bull not providing me with a car, I need a change. Or if Pierre Gasly doesn't perform, we know Christian Horner rates Alonso very highly. And he would at that point be one of the few sort of world champions left on the grid. So why wouldn't Red Bull want to take on a two-time world champ, in favor of a couple time race winners in Gasly and Ricciardo? I don't actually think it's that out of the question that Alonso could get that drive either 2019 or 2020.
I think 2020, if we move forward to that, this is where things do get interesting because the car has improved even more and is still like just almost there. And now, so if maybe they would have put the curveball of let's give it a lot back to Alonso, because what was he doing at this point? 1920, he didn't. Did he do?
He was in WEC. So 2019 he finished
Nothing.
his. 2019 he finished his WEC championship, which he won, and then he also did 24 Hours of Daytona, won that. He started prepping for Dakar in 2020. So yeah, 1920 were the years where he just went to do absolutely everything to have fun, basically.
Mm.
So what are we saying for 19 then to transition? Are we saying 2019 Gasly and
Yeah, you mean 2020?
Yeah, going into 2020, yeah.
Let's say let's make it interesting and let's say Gasly and Alonso at Red Bull.
Yeah,
And then Toro Rosso, I guess it's still Albon. Does Wehrlein still stay or does he try his luck somewhere else?
Because looking at the drivers, the young drivers at that point, in 2019, Red Bull Academy had Pato O'Ward, who had just won Indy Lights. Now, do you transition from Indy Lights to Formula One in what would have been one of the most insane moves in recent history? I'm not sure.
It's hard to say because he had the similar thing that what happened with Dan Ticktum was they both did Super Formula, I think 2019. Ticktum crashed his car and cracked the chassis, and then it became just undrivable, and his results went down the toilet. And then he got dropped. They put Pato O'Ward in, and the same thing happened to him, and then he got dropped because they just didn't want to blame the car for some reason. But now I need to look at the junior team. So at this point, okay, another thing. So Jack Doohan, Yuri Vips, and Dennis Hauger, 2020 would have been their third year as juniors.
Nowhere near Formula One.
Still not. Yeah. Hauger. So 2020, that was Hauger's first year in Formula 3. Vips did Frecker a bit, and Formula 2 a bit. Doohan, Formula. Yeah, so they're not ready. Pato O'Ward. I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest. That would have been quite a significant gap. Also because he kind of turned his nose up at Formula 2 because he did one weekend of it in 2019 filling in for Mahavir Raghunathan when he got a race ban. And he was like, yeah, these cars suck. Like they drive like ass and they brake all the time. So I want nothing to do with this.
Let's just keep that line, I guess, just for... It's a third year. I guess 3 years is what you usually get there. He would have been very disgruntled, but it's more for the sake of I have no idea who else I would put there.
Yeah.
Who else was young?
He's the port in their storm. There's
I'd say that it's
yeah. So 2020, of course, this is the COVID year. I
Yeah.
was going to think. This is a slight aside regarding the calendar. It was Zandvoort was meant to come back in 20, but got cancelled. Come back the year before. I think we can probably assume the Dutch Grand Prix doesn't come back at all, with no Max.
Yeah.
There's not much of an incentive.
Yeah.
The Austrian Grand Prix isn't quite the party it was. I guess it probably still would stay as Red Bull's home thing, but there's no orange army, spraying bloody that orange smoke all over the track and attacking people. And yeah, I guess the Austrian Grand Prix would stay, but yeah, no, there would be no Dutch Grand Prix. That would definitely be something that would change. But now we have Alonso. I think it would have been a similar performance to Max in that the car is just not quite fast enough to overtake Red Bull, but there's to overtake Mercedes, but there's going to be a win or two amid a bunch of engine failures. But one more thing to factor in, of course, is now they do have Honda engines, and we know how that went at McLaren. So would Honda themselves might be like, I don't think we want him driving for us again.
Well, I think we could just use a recent example to weigh this up and say, well, Honda aren't opposed to Alonso driving their cars because he signed a 2-year deal. He's going to be driving with Honda engines in 2026. So I don't see why Honda would go. They've worked with Alonso. They know he can be difficult, but as long as they're performing, which obviously any team, especially like Honda, are going to believe they're going to perform well, I assume they'd have no real opposition to having Alonso back because they didn't in the current day.
And I guess at that point, a lot of time has passed as well.
Yeah.
And they're confident the car's good, so he won't complain as much.
And he would have won races at that point. So, yeah, we have Alonso winning a race or two in 2020. I mean, that's where people forget a lot. 2020, they feel like Verstappen just matured in 2021 miraculously. When 2020, I mean, Peter, you said that in your driver of the day video. Verstappen was insane in 2020. He was always competing with Bottas for P2, more often outperforming him in what was a clearly second fastest car. So you put Alonso there, it would have been the same or maybe a bit less, but still you would have had an Alonso who gets a lot of podiums, maybe somewhere nabs a win, and then that keeps him there for 21. Gasly becomes the crux of the conversation. Do they swap him, or what does he do?
I guess I would now argue, looking at how close Gasly and Ocon are in current sort of cars, which is basically the best basis we can go off, and knowing that by the time Alonso had sort of gotten back into F1, he was, I think the general consensus is, despite him having engine issues and finishing behind Gasly in terms of points, so not Gasly, Ocon in terms of points, he was the quicker of the two drivers. So does that mean Gasly being on a similar pace to Ocon, I think they're comparable, does that mean Alonso sort of outperforms him and shows him up just a little bit to the point where Red Bull are going, well, look, Gasly, maybe it's time for a swap. Maybe if Alex Albon or Verline are performing well.
I think that definitely happens because in our hypothetical, Alonso maybe doesn't even take a hiatus, or he takes a hiatus for 1 year where he probably stays in and around Formula One. So his form wouldn't have dipped, and he wouldn't have had to readapt. So I feel like Gasly would have been out for sure, especially with the Red Bull dynamic. They would have been like, yeah, this is not normal. And yeah, does he get the swap with Verline, and then Red Bull 21 becomes the NAV F1 dream team of Alonso and Verline, which wasn't meant to be the point of this video. I mean, this episode. But yeah, Alonso Verline at Red Bull in 21. That's something I would have committed many crimes for to happen.
Because they don't still have the sort of talent vacuum that led them to give a lifeline to Checo.
Yeah.
So maybe Checo still just gets dropped and, I don't know, goes on to IndyCar or something like that. But yeah, okay, so if we think that Gasly's out, regardless, where does he go? Does he go back down? He probably would.
Renault, because there's no Alonso at Renault, so they do the Ocon Gasly thing.
At
Can you
Alpine,
imagine?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine the 2021 launch of Alpine, where they actually have a French-looking car and they have Ocon and Gasly. That would have
Yes.
been perfect, actually.
Hmm.
So
Okay, so then if we think, okay, I need to think now. It's either Ocon or Ocon, Verline or Albon moving up to Red Bull in 21. That still leaves us with a vacancy at Toro Rosso.
yeah,
So now we
Tsunoda?
can,
Because we've
yeah,
got Honda now.
yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yes, okay, that solves that one. I was trying to, I was going to be like, Hauger, Vips, are they gonna like? Ugh.
Yeah, because Vips, that's another one where we can't really forget. Vips was very much in the conversation at one point. Vips and Lawson start to get into the conversation. Maybe for 22, they're more in there, but 21, 22, Vips was the better one of the two.
By this point, he was basically the lead junior. I mean, 2020, that was the year. 2021 was the year that Hauger shat all over everyone in Formula 3. So that's still too early. Vips, it was 2022 was when Vips had, N-word gate and all of that happened.
Yeah.
When they were like grooming him for a seat. But yeah, I guess it is just Tsunoda. So now we need to think about Albon and Verline. Who's it going to be at Red Bull?
Are we saying Albon has good performances in Toro Rosso like he did in real life? And if so, would he be better than Verline, who's, I mean, I guess getting a little bit older at this point? But then again, he's been at the team longer. So is it, Red Bull go, well, it's your turn to step up?
I guess it depends if Red Bull want two drivers who complain endlessly and
Yeah.
and play the victim. Then yeah,
Maybe
Because
Albon to
it's-
play more second fiddle to Alonso if they've got a
Exactly,
lead
because
driver.
I agree with that.
Alonso probably wouldn't want Verline on there on that basis.
Yeah, I can see Alonso Albon being a thing. The issue is Verline would have never stayed at Toro Rosso for fifth year. So now we do have to go back into who do we put next to Tsunoda?
Yeah, if
'cause
we
there's
think
no
if we think Verline's going to leave and does he go to another team or does he take
he- I mean, I feel like it's irrelevant, but he leaves the Red Bull thingy for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So now we've got Tsunoda and oh god,
I have an idea
Well-
that could make it a bit easier. Is if
Go
I
on.
know we said Gasly to Alpine to do the French thing, but if Verline's been doing really well, maybe he signs earlier and it's a last minute change, something like that. It could then be the Gasly Tsunoda lineup if Gasly gets demoted like Kvyat did. So they could end up doing that instead and just doing a swap between Gasly and Albon like we saw in real life. And that would more closely align as well to us going like completely off on these big tangents. Either that, or unless you want to just have a big talk about the junior team again, I'm all down for that.
I mean, Gasly. I don't think Gasly would have accepted doing at this point. God, I need to write this all down. I'm getting everything confused. If he's done what 5 years as the second driver at Red Bull, and then he gets put back down to Toro Rosso.
He commits suicide on the Alps. Like that's
Yeah, I don't think he would have accepted a demotion, and everyone would have been like, "Well, what's the point of this team that's now AlphaTauri? You're meant to be the stepping stone. You're not meant to be the boulder you throw at their head or something." I don't know. Yeah.
Jehan Deruvala.
Oh man. I mean, okay. Well, that would have been. I think Hauger and Vips would have been like, "Yeah, what the fuck is this?" If you're bringing Deruvala in,
Because Hauger and Vips in 21, they still lacked experience, whereas Deruvala was Tsunoda's teammate in Formula 2.
Yeah, he was in Formula 2 and he won Asian F3.
Yeah.
And he has a ton of money. Isn't his dad like the richest person in India or something?
No, not the richest, but he owns a lot of land around, I think, Mumbai, so that is obviously a lot of money.
Yeah. He was with Carlin, 21. Let's look at this. Blah, 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 blah. 2 wins, 7th in the standings. Yeah.
A good point is Mick Schumacher. He would have had a lot of hype around him at that point. And it says here that Franz Tost wanted to sign him for 2021. So
Well,
that would line up
that's a
perfectly.
sort of
I mean, yeah,
that's a sort of equipment there.
he's a Ferrari junior, but maybe they could have stolen him, and then maybe that gives Humpty Dumpty is still
Yeah.
going to Haas, but I guess that means that Ilott now gets the seat at Haas as well. So that
Yeah,
gives
even
him
better. I think this is all working out for 21 actually.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
It's all
So
falling
is
into
the 21 lineup Alonso, Albon in Red Bull, and Sonoda Schumacher in AlphaTauri?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah?
let's go with that. That's fun. Okay, now we need to
That's
think
fun.
about
That's very fun. I think this should have happened actually.
so now we have basically 2007 part 2. We've got Hamilton facing off against Alonso in 14 years later. How do we think this pans out with everything that we know took place?
You're asking Dan and me, so you would have needed Kyron here for this to be a
Yeah.
long debate. I think there's only one answer here.
I'm gonna say the thing. The thing is, I feel like Alonso, even at his age, he's only kind of marginally behind Max in terms of ability and skill and pace. He's like Max if Max made a mistake once every like 5 or 6 races or something. I think Alonso could still, well, maybe he still wins it, but then if you think psychologically that Hamilton was able to sort of break him when he was a rookie, think about what he's going to do now when he's on 7 titles.
But the thing is, considering the crashes in Silverstone and Monza, Jeddah again, I don't think those happen. Maybe Jeddah happens, whatever, but Monza and Silverstone wouldn't happen for sure. Like
Yeah,
Alonso
they're less
wouldn't do
likely.
that.
He
Yeah,
would
they-
he would have played the long game a bit more.
He would have
Even if
cut the chicane, like going into that chicane, he would have cut it and overtaken like 6 drivers and then called the FIA like on the radio and being like, this is legal because you pushed me off. And then
he'll have been
something
there,
would-
like on the radio, he'll have been citing the exact article and line in the regulations. Is like, this is my loophole. I'm allowed to cut to use the escape road here.
Yeah.
Silverstone, I think Silverstone, he would have maybe just finished second or something.
Silverstone
although
could still have happened because Max. I feel I could see Alonso and Max taking the same line through there.
Yeah, I think, and again, nobody wants to hear this, but that it's on Lewis not really attempting to make the apex. I mean, he's pulled that same move countless times, and he does it because he gets away with it. So yeah, that probably still happens. And you get to
Because
the tail.
Alonso has been involved in that corner a few times, most famously against Vettel in 2014. And he usually knows when to let the other one go or to keep going. The thing is, as you guys pointed out, it wasn't a Verstappen issue, it was a Lewis issue.
Yeah, it is.
so-
It's another thing I think about Alonso being clever is that because I just released my Super Aguri video. Obviously, their crowning moment or their shining moment was when Sato passed Alonso in Canada, but then you look at it again, it's like you can just see that Alonso's letting him through. It kind of ruins it. It's not like, yeah, he's being clever and like, I'm not going to crash. I need these points, even though he still lost the championship. And that, yeah. Later in the season, because for most of the year, Red Bull do have the faster car. And then towards the end, Hamilton gets that very interesting engine that makes DRS essentially irrelevant. But then also we need to think about Albon as his second driver. Is he going to be any good at being a supportive role? Is he going to be, well, helping the constructors, but is he someone that they could trust to kind of get in Mercedes' way and rain on their parade a bit in terms of strategy and defense and all of that? Yeah.
Given Albon's had a bit more time to develop at Toro Rosso in this timeline, and knowing what we know now from his drives at Williams, that he's a good defensive driver, I could see him doing some similar stuff that Checo did for Max, like defending against Hamilton in Abu Dhabi. I could see Albon being able to take that role. I don't think pace-wise he'd be near Alonso, and I think he'd still take a second driver role. But I do think he could potentially insert himself in there to do some good defending, do some good driving, especially if he's a bit more experienced than he was when he initially got to Red Bull.
I think he would be better as well because this other thing that we have about Max being a teammate destroyer is that they build a car suited to his driving style of being very oversteery and just very loose in a way that he can control. If there's no Max, there's no need to build a car like that. So maybe they can build something which is more accommodating of, well, Alonso in this case, and maybe that. I'm not an expert on whose driving styles are like what, but maybe that works better for Albon, and he is just able to be more competitive because the car is easier to drive, and he knows he's still a second, and maybe he does. He's a very good kind of Patrese Barrichello hybrid or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's quite fair. Quite good assessment of 21. What would have happened in the junior team then? Oh, what I'm wondering is, do we, because we were saying, what if Max never gets to Formula One? Do we have to keep going with the junior team? But we have been doing anyway, so might as well. So yeah, what happens with this interesting Yuki Mick dynamic? I feel like Yuki would have performed better, especially as Yuki would have had maybe some insider Honda reports or maybe just more backing from Red Bull. But what do you guys think?
I mean, they're both rookies. So I think the team would have got fewer points. I mean, Mick would not have been able to match what Gasly did. So yeah, it would have been just a standard sort of similar to what Buemi and AlphaTauri did back in the day, just kind of lower midfield type of gig. Yeah.
I actually think this would have helped Mick in the long term in his career actually stay in F1 because both Yuki and Mick weren't that great in their rookie years. So I think it would have actually made, similar to how Mazepin did, it would have made Mick probably look a bit better rather than when he went up against Magnussen and was making quite a few mistakes and then eventually got dropped. I think him and Yuki would learn at a similar rate. So I think that actually would have helped him in the long term, being alongside another rookie for, I mean, if we go look at what they actually did in real life, which was keep Yuki on, I imagine they keep both of them on for another year unless someone's abysmal, which neither I can see being.
So, yeah, because in real life, Mick, he was flattered by Humpty Dumpty, but then the car was useless. That kind of countered that. So I think it would have just been a kind of an average. I think people would have still been looking at him like expecting him to be amazing because he's Michael's son. And another one, because we're saying obviously, I don't. Yeah, Haas would have been a similar story with Ilott and Mazepin. It would have just been no points and just blah blah blah. Yeah, not much going on there. But now, yeah, I think they would have done enough to stay for 22.
Yeah.
What's happened to Gasly? Where did we put him? I've forgotten.
Alpine.
Oh, he's at Alpine. Okay, so he's settled. Yeah, so that's everyone's still where they're.
Let's assume also Kvyat has either gone to WEC or sorted something out.
By this point, he's doing his WEC thing. What's the other one? Verline. Is he sold his soul to Formula E or?
Maybe Verline's gone to McLaren or something. Because
in place
Sainz.
of what? In place of. But then where does Sainz go?
Ferrari
because
still?
Sainz would
Oh, he's
still
a
go to
Ferrari. Who
Yeah.
was? Oh God, 21. It was
There's-
Ricciardo. Yes. Oh, Ricciardo was. Where's and has Ricciardo left Formula One now, or is he?
No, so Ricciardo Verline are at
I think we're not just
Ferrari.
worrying about them too much where they've
I
gone.
can't.
because-
I need to write this down. I'm forgetting where we've put everyone. I thought Ricciardo had gone to Renault, but then not, and now that's Gasly and Ocon.
No, but then Ricciardo goes to Ferrari to replace Vettel, and Verline is at McLaren. There you go.
And Leclerc is still.
Leclerc has retired from Formula One because he's grieving Antoine Hubert's death.
No, so it's still Leclerc and
Leclerc and Ricciardo would have been the one. Yeah.
at Ferrari.
Yeah.
Vettel went to Aston Martin then.
Yeah, Vettel was still at Aston Martin in 21. Ilott is, I guess, Ilott is the one that replaces Max in the sense that he's the driver that's that void.
Yes.
When you shuffle it. Every other driver is the same or is in Formula One, but maybe a slightly different team.
At least that's the narrative we're going with. Otherwise, we are promoting 3 other drivers from Formula 2, and we're not doing that.
Okay. I should have been writing this down as we went along. No biggie.
I don't think we need to worry too much, do we, about like where everyone else is, as long as we sort of, as
Yeah.
long as we know the main contenders for the title.
I
and
think
who's
the
at Red
thing.
Bull.
I think the thing everyone wants to hear is that Alonso wins the title at what 39, nearly 20 end of 21. He's 40 years old,
Yeah,
isn't
he's
he?
40. He's 40. He's born in 81, so he's 40.
Yeah, 40 years old. 16 years after his 15 years after his second title.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, just for the listeners, in the future we're gonna try to keep track of our moves. This is the first what if, but there are gonna be a lot of other what ifs with drivers. So Peter's gonna keep track of all of it, and then we're just gonna share
Yeah.
it in the comments.
I'm gonna have
or
to
something.
write it all down.
So anyway, 2022. Now we're getting closer. Alonso, Albon, I guess they stay because it works. Albon is good
Well,
at
I'm
developing
gonna
cars.
interrupt you there. What if Alonso pulls like an Alan Prost and he goes, "I just wanted like a third title and I'm done."
Ooh.
Oh.
No, but that's Alonso. What would he do then?
No, he's not gonna. Yeah. What?
Actually, no. Actually, that's a good point because in
Rule
our timeline,
changes.
he does not take a break, and if he does not take a break, he might be like, okay, now I'm actually tired of Formula One.
And also because there's the new rule changes coming in with ground effect, and he thinks,
Yes.
well, there's no guarantee. Well, unless he thinks, well, Newey knows what he's doing. Maybe he does think now. Let's call it quits at 40.
Maybe he's still. So okay, then let's just decide this now quickly. Does he stay knowing that Red Bull probably has an edge? Because it was quite known even from December 21 onwards that Red Bull would be clear. I remember Ferrari doing decent in the tests, but everyone knew that Red Bull would be clear.
He wouldn't have known that Mercedes were going to be useless as well in 22. And why not? Maybe he does want to keep going. I suppose actually also the circumstances are a bit different because with the only reason that Prost did not carry on was because his veto to keep Senna out expired, and he knew that Senna was going to come in, and it's like, well, I don't want that. So unless Hamilton tries to join Red Bull in 21, there's no reason for Alonso to be like, yeah, I'm not doing it. 22 even, I'm not doing this. So I think he does.
Especially as what would they have done? What would Red Bull have done? Now, are we considering the take back Vettel from Aston Martin for 22? That's the only alternative to Alonso at that point is
because they're not putting Mick or Tsunoda up that early.
Exactly. So and
I don't think their line's going to come crawling back.
So I feel like the only alternative would have been the take back Vettel.
I'm guessing as well, like the actual Red Bull team are gonna want to keep Alonso because you've got to remember, like 2021 would have been one of the most exciting years. Still, yeah, it would just instead of being Verstappen and Hamilton, it's Alonso and Hamilton Part 2. So it would have generated all the hype it did, still like it did in the real timeline. So you're gonna have like Christian Horner, Helmut Marko willing to shell out absolutely tons of money to keep Alonso for the next year, and then I assume keeping the same lineup for both teams into 22.
Yeah.
There's no reason to change. I mean, maybe I'll just a quick glance at the juniors again, see who's doing what in 22.
Well, that's when Vips, Lawson, Doohan, all this batch really comes of age. So
yeah, they're all up to Formula 2 level.
so Vips and Lawson would be knocking on the door.
Vips is at the front of the queue.
That's when we might have to consider Mick or Vips. Then again, Mick was always going to have 2 years in Formula One. I feel like wherever he was, Formula One wanted him to have at least 2 years. So maybe a quick discussion of Tsunoda or Vips if Vips never goes on that stream.
I mean, the Vips one is complicated because things were going really badly before that. Because again, I covered this in the Red Bull transfer video. It started. He crashed out in Imola. Then he spun off in the sprint race in Barcelona and had a really bad pit stop in the feature race. That was the same weekend that he did his Grand Prix weekend debut with Red Bull. He drove for them in FP1, but he just did long runs on hards and was like 4 seconds off the pace, wasn't pushing himself.
Yeah.
Then he crashes from the lead in Baku. and then it's like a week later that he has the Twitch stream. So behind the scenes, I think things psychologically, something had just kind of broken him before he got dropped, before the Twitch stream happened. And he was so obviously being, groomed and set up to take a seat. He would have been, if we think that this was in preparation for 23.
No, 2. So that's for 2022.
This all happened in 2022 in real life.
Oh yeah. So
in preparation for 23, who was driving Alpha last year? De Vries. He probably would have got the seat instead of De Vries, alongside Tsunoda. But that, if we think that still happens, unless we think that Max's absence makes him less racist or something, then I think we can. That's probably still all happening, and he's not he's not getting the seat.
Right. So this video about Verstappen not making it to F1 has led to Eurovips not being racist.
Yes, yeah, and they're still taking the knee to this day before each race. Hauger, as I said, he shat all over everyone in Formula 3 and then has been kind of immensely mid in Formula 2 so far. So he maybe wouldn't quite have been ready. Deruvela, I think he was better. I get this. It's so confusing, Formula 2.
Vips, Lawson, and Deruvela at that point. Of course, Vips and Lawson were higher up, but then Deruvela had more backing. So I feel like all of this can be answered in with do we keep Tsunoda Mick or do we just shove a new driver in there? Because if we're keeping the 2022 Red Bull lineup, maybe we want to be interesting and change things a bit, but then that either cruelly gets rid of Yuki or Mick.
And then that makes me think about Haas quickly, sorry, because we got Ilott and Humpty Dumpty. Do we have a butterfly effect where if Max Verstappen doesn't exist, Putin never invades Ukraine, and Mazepin gets to stay at Haas? Otherwise,
so Max Verstappen caused the Ukraine invasion.
Yeah, we've created world peace. It just needs to not exist.
We've not considered De Vries either. He's just won Formula E. The year
Alonso
so
he stays in Formula E. De Vries should never have been considered.
But if he's just won Formula E, and now you've got maybe an underperforming Tsunoda / Mick Schumacher, there's a chance for him to come in 2 years earlier.
Well, he was a Merc Junior at that point.
He was still a Mercedes Junior. 22 was the year that he had the time with the race with Williams, where he for some reason amazed everyone by beating Latifi. Without that, maybe I don't think he would have been much of a. I don't think he would have been in the picture really, because he was still a Mercedes Junior.
Right. So what do we do? Let's move on.
I think maybe they stay the same in 22. That might be the easiest option.
Yeah. Okay. And Vips, Lawson, Deruvela keep crying on the corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
we're not much better than the Red Bull officials. Actually, we're still just keeping drivers out of this.
Yeah. We're scared of taking risks.
Okay, let's say Alonso wins 22 easily.
Which he would.
Goes on winning streaks and all, and then he's on 4 then. So he will have beaten his idol Senna and one of his good friends and mentors late in his career, Prost. Let's just make it interesting, even though I don't think he would have actually left. Let's say he leaves because he's now won 4.
Yeah.
And maybe winning what will have been like 12 in a row or 10 in a row will have bored him out of his mind. Let's say he leaves, also to give a chance to some other drivers.
It's time for Albon to be at the top. Or
what happens in 23? They need a big driver. Vettel at that point, I think he will have made a bit of a mess of himself at Aston, so he's not in contention. Do they, and that's my main point now, they will have had, well, do they take Sainz back? Because I think that's the main thing here. After letting go of Sainz, I feel like he would have been the main guy to take back in 2023.
Where has he been in all of this? Was he at Ferrari again, or have we
No, he just
Wow.
stayed at McLaren.
Mm.
Like,
still at McLaren? And
So
then
how
Ferrari
did
was.
Verline go to McLaren? Sorry,
I thought that
because Lando and
oh, then he's at Ferrari. Yeah, he does
he's
go to
still at
Ferrari.
Ferrari with Leclerc,
Yes.
and it's Lando and Ricciardo's still at McLaren.
Renault.
Well, Ricciardo's left. Ricciardo, after making a mess of himself,
Ricciardo's
is
gone.
left.
He's
Yeah.
become a Netflix producer or something.
Yes.
If we look to this
What-
year, one of the reasons Lando Norris declined the Red Bull seat was because he's going to be against Max. So what if he got offered it?
Which quartet? Yeah, but his bestie Albon. He
Yeah.
might go there for 23. Yeah, and then that could work. Lando Albon. So
Yeah, then McLaren's able to offer a seat to Pato Award or something.
yeah, why not? Yeah, he can have it with Sainz still at. Oh no, he's at Ferrari.
No, with Piastri, because Alpine would have
Oh,
kept
correct.
their
Yes,
Alpine would
yeah,
have kept their Franco-Francais lineup, and then Piastri still leaves. So you've got a nice little Piastri Award lineup at McLaren, and then Helmut does get his Lando Wonderkind.
And then AlphaTauri is who drove for them last year? Oh, it was De Vries and then Lawson and thing. So we've gone from Schumacher and Tsunoda.
Yeah, so I'd say Mick gets dropped and Lawson gets promoted, and then we move on. I think it's as simple as that.
Oh yeah, Lawson is a thing. Why didn't I've completely forget because I'm looking at the wrong part of the junior table. I forgot Lawson exists. Okay, and then Haas was Ilott and Mazepin's gone.
I guess they take Magnussen back anyway then.
Yeah, they bring Magnussen back, and it's him and Ilott. Ilott's probably thinking, I want to move up at this point because this is getting boring. But there's nowhere else to go except for
Aston Martin if Vettel retires.
Yeah, if he's still a Red Bull Junior, my first would be Alpha in place of.
Well, no, there's no Guan Yu Zhou if he does perform at Haas, so yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. So that'll be that.
Are we fine with just Mick and Lawson swapping? I feel like it's the easiest.
Is Tsunoda still there?
Yeah. I feel like Tsunoda would have gotten all those years anyway with Honda.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have 23. We've got Lando Albon.
Is there more of a title fight between Lando and Albon?
Yeah. I think it'd be close. Definitely.
Albon will have spent 4 years there, and maybe will have developed the car a lot.
Lando will become the first driver to win the championship with only P2 finishes.
Yes, yeah, he does he goes one better than Mike Hawthorne, without the whole, dying a month later. Yeah, it would have been quite an entertaining year, I think, because they would have been fighting fairly closely, and we would have had the whole. It would have been similar to like Hamilton Rosberg, that they used to be besties and now they hate each other because they have to fight for the title and that. It would have been. It would have had similar vibes to the Mercedes of old. Who is just a shell of themselves, still being kind of half-assed at this point. So that's a title for Lando, do we think, or Albon?
Lando still pips him.
Lando wins it he finishes second 21 times.
Yes.
And still wins. Yeah.
Whereas Albon wins like 3 or 4 races, but that doesn't do anything.
And so at this point, Lando's got 35 podiums with no wins in his career or something like that.
I think no matter what, like we could even say like we don't know out of those two who'd win it. It would just be a lot more entertaining title fight than the actual 2023 was.
Yeah, people would still be watching. Hamilton's fans would be a bit less hysterical because, they'd all be targeting Alonso, but he's now gone.
Leclerc has gone completely depressed because he's seen all this breadth of talent usurp him to titles, and at that point maybe Albon will have more wins than him, probably.
Yeah, he's literally crying in a Ferrari.
Yeah, because our producer did imply. I mean, he did suggest we drop Alonso in 22, but that's too much of a ask, I guess, after he wins his third. Because if Alonso's dropped, Leclerc wins. So let's just put that out. That's a hypothetical. Maybe Leclerc wins 22. I just don't think Alonso would have.
I feel like I'm getting everything mixed up. Sainz is still at Ferrari, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay, so at this point, the only teams that are different are Haas, Alpha, and Red Bull.
And there's a new driver at Aston, but this
Yeah,
maybe
someone else
Drogovic.
is
Oh.
Aston.
Give it to
Of
Drogovic.
course. Ooh.
The Brazilians are happy.
Oh yeah,
Give
yeah.
it to-
Drogovic can have it. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, actually that has given us a natural grid there because Ricciardo leaves, Vettel leaves, Wehrlein, who's become a protagonist in this video, leaves. Yeah, and then we found opportunities for Award, Drogovic, Lawson gets a drive earlier, Eilert gets a drive. He always deserved one. I think this is F1 would have been better without Verstappen.
We basically fixed Formula One. Of course, we're not quite done yet because we've got 2024. So now I can think a bit clearer because I can remember the grid this year.
Yeah.
So he wins it in 23. I'm assuming. Do we think that Albon and Lando they both stay for 24? Probably.
Yeah. Albon is now the absolute ambassador for Red Bull in every single department possible because he has the, he's driving for Thailand, so Red Bull absolutely love him.
Oh yeah, yes, of course, Diane.
Yeah.
Then Alpha RB is still it's still going to be Tsunoda Lawson, we think.
Yeah.
Haas, Eilert Magnussen, would they bring whole?
I'm guessing Hulkenberg maybe goes to Sauber a year earlier and comes back in preparation for Audi.
Where has he been in all of this? Hulkenberg, he did Renault for a bit. Was he gone and then came back?
So he
Yeah.
was
he
Renault
went to Williams.
2019.
He was gone for like 3 years, wasn't he? Of course. He wasn't there in 20 to 20. Yeah. So he's just not. Is he just not a thing anymore?
No, but also I reckon maybe he comes back in 22 to like at Williams where Albon would have been, because Williams is a team that we haven't really spoken about. So he goes to Williams, performs greatly because he knows the team. That's where he got his debut. And then as Dan says, he goes to Sauber a year earlier, and I think that works out as well.
But then Latifi might get dropped, and so last year we get Captain America, and then who joins him?
If we consider, well, I don't know if we agreed on this or not. I saw Nav write it down. Was that Alonso wins the title earlier than Max does in 21? Does Latifi actually have a reason to quit anymore if he doesn't cause a big controversy?
Oh yeah, he's not the
because that was the only reason he left.
But there's no. It has to be this lap. Well, I mean, I think it was more than that. I mean, he had lots of money, but I think the results. Well, no, 2022. Maybe it did wreck him because 22 was when he did start crashing all the time, and he'd been kind of all right up until then.
He did say it was because of like the online, like just people target him online, Hamilton fans so much that was why he left and just went under the radar because he just couldn't cope with all of the backlash.
So maybe he stays in 23. He's got his cushy little gig. Bankrolling Williams, and he's joined by Captain America, and they have this extremely mid. Yeah, they finish at the bottom basically, like no points are scored, and back row every race. But they make each other look good somehow, by being just equally bad.
The TV probably looks really good in comparison.
Yeah. So now. So this year, I guess at Kick Sauber, we've got Hulkenberg and still Bottas.
Yeah.
It's a Tsunoda Lawson at RB. Then it's the two North Americans in Williams. Drogovic, is he still Aston Martin with Daddy's Cash, or
who did you say for Williams? Sargent, because I'm just noting it down. So
Sargent and Latifi. Do we
Yeah.
think Latifi's? He's probably still there, Latifi, and Logan's going to still be there.
Yeah.
Aston, well, Daddy's Cash will still be there, but would Drogovic? He probably, I guess he'd stay.
Yeah.
They'll give him a second year. I mean, I'm sure he'd be fairly harmless.
Yeah. Alpine has Ocon Gasly still, because why not?
Unless they've killed each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ferrari is still Leclerc, and is it still Sainz?
Yeah.
That's the same.
Is McLaren Piastri Ward now because of their line of
Yeah.
tyres?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I'm forgetting a team here. So
Mm.
Red Bull, Ferrari,
Mercedes,
McLaren,
we've got Mercedes.
Mercedes is
yeah,
still
no,
Hamilton.
Mercedes they do their own thing. Yeah.
Haas.
Aston.
That's wasn't
Oh,
that
yeah,
Magnus?
Haas.
Ilott is
Yeah.
still going to be. I guess Ilott would still. Yeah, third year. Magnussen. There's nowhere better to go. Especially, although actually it might create a bit of a crisis because if we think that Hamilton is still going to Ferrari next year, that kicks Sainz out. And also Ilott's been like, well, I wanted that seat at some point, so what happens to me as well?
That's 2025's problem.
Yeah, I was thinking, do we want to start thinking about how 25 ends up looking with no Max? If we
I
think
imagine Sainz does what maybe Sainz will do, which is kick out Bottas from Sauber.
That's a good one. That solves a lot of issues.
and still, yeah, Sainz Hulkenberg reuniting a lineup that Renault lineup, which I can't remember if that did or didn't happen in this timeline, but probably.
And then there's also potential for Stroll. I mean, there's still potential like this year in real life that Stroll might get kicked out if Lawrence loses a lot of the percentage of Aston, so that could give Ilott a chance to move up a team.
Mm-hmm. With
No,
Drogovic.
that could actually give a chance to Jessica Hawkins. Wasn't she faster than Lance Stroll in those tests?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's another thing. Getting rid of Max, we've solved sexism because we can get Jamie Chadwick in a Williams seat as well, and yeah, without him, suddenly we've done that too. So
That's incredible. We've achieved world peace. We've solved racism and solved sexism. So.
yeah,
It's all Max Verstappen's fault.
It's not Formula One. It's Formula Equal. And Drogovic is now on what, third season, I guess. Is it?
Yeah, he's the number one driver there. They have loads of.
Yeah, he's probably fine there. Doing
Yeah,
his
they
thing.
have loads of Brazilian sponsors. Yeah, I think they'd be doing great.
They'd be fine. RB is still. I think they're still questioning about Tsunoda. Lawson is fine. I imagine at this point Lawson might be getting prepped for a 25 seat.
Yeah.
Whoever loses the championship, he gets their
Yeah.
seat maybe.
Yeah.
Tsunoda, maybe he just disappears, and then the other juniors, the current ones, because Hauger's now gone, Jack Crawford's gone, Jack Doohan is gone. They've still got Zane Maloney's gone. Enzo Fittipaldi is still.
Well, maybe let's say in this timeline, Zane Maloney's not gone, and then they just put Zane Maloney there.
Oh yeah, because there's no point going to Sauber's locked in with the others, so he gets he can take Tsunoda's seat in 25, and Tsunoda goes on to Super Formula something.
We have solved Formula One in such a good way. They started with, who do we kick out? Jean-Éric Vergne or not? And then now it's the best grid I think I have seen.
We've solved, the climate crisis and the war in Russia, Ukraine, Palestine. All of that has been fixed.
There's been a female F1 driver in Formula One for a year because Williams gave a chance to Chadwick.
I mean, Jess Hawkins is on the arc to winning, 10 titles in a row. It's all falling into place. Just need to get Max out of the way.
This was a perfect start to the what if series, I feel. This is
this one. I mean, I'm assuming people will like it. We definitely have more drivers that we're going to try and delete from existence in the future and see if that fixes things. And
throw out another one here for you. At the end of 24, Magnussen gets dropped for Oliver Behrman still, or something. Now Hulkenberg,
yeah. And so now it's Haas. Who's the other one? Is it still Ilott? No,
Yeah,
he was
yeah.
at. No, Ilott goes to Aston, doesn't he? Because
yeah,
we get rid
Stroll
of.
leaves.
So that would be Behrman and.
Porsche, there you go. There's a new one.
Oh, I was going to say maybe Giovinazzi because it's a Ferrari thing.
Or
Yeah.
maybe Magnussen stays then if Ilott's leaving. Behrman can just replace him.
Oh, it's too. I should have been writing this down as we went along because this is way too confusing.
Anyway, I feel like that this is good for this one, and for the next episodes, we can definitely have an on-screen changing graphic as we go.
Yeah, some good Photoshop skills, swapping heads onto different overalls would.
Our producer loves it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So that was good fun. I think there's really testing my trying to remember who drove for what in real life and then pretend that never happened. But yeah, we can have some fun with these types of videos in the future with other drivers as well.
Definitely, this was incredibly fun, and I'm looking forward to doing more videos like this because it really fits the podcast format as well.
Yeah, it was quite hilarious, and it was also just like really good fun to go through, and then going like, oh, Alonso gets 4 world championships, Norris and Albon have a title fight. It's just fun. It would be. I would love to know like what would have actually happened, if how close we would have been to getting it right. But yeah, it was awesome.
But yeah, thanks as ever to Nav and to Dan. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.